Wow. I mean, this has made my day, week, month, year. This is just absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. I saw that once before, that video, but it's just great fun. But thank you. It's lovely. I've got two friends here, in fact, from long, long ago. We were in the PhD program together at Stanford. Michael Porter and Jonathan Pincus are both here over there, and we have great fun. I haven't seen you guys in a long time. You look awfully old, by the way. And with respect to that, James, I do want to say something to you. You welcomed all the young members. Don't discriminate. Just because we have fewer years left doesn't mean we aren't cool people. But no, the introduction was lovely. God, that was nice. I wish my mom and dad were still alive and could have actually heard it. It would have been just great. My dad would have been so proud. And my mom would have actually believed it. But let me, if I can, I'm going to have a little fun with you tonight, if I may. Is that all right? And we'll have a little fun. We'll wander over a little economics. And some of you may know, I think it was 2006. I've been a Californian for years and years and years, and I decided finally to pack up my bags and get out of Dodge and move to Nashville, Tennessee. Now, can any of you guess why I would move from California to Nashville? No taxes. You got it. And now I hope I'm not going way over your heads tonight. So tell me if I'm getting too complicated and technical. But if you have two locations, A and B, if they raise taxes in B and lower them in A, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from, to. Am I going way over your head? I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, which has no income tax. California has the highest income tax. I was able to buy my house with my first year's tax savings. I have to admit, I did have to put up watercolors all around the house with palm trees and sunshine and beaches and all over there. I had Beach Boy music playing in the background, all the beach sound, and I had salt spray in every room so for about 2 or 3 years till I sort of weaned myself from the addiction of California. And but it was fun. Now, I did miss some things in California. I missed our former governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I did. I didn't miss his economics, let me tell you that, but I did miss him. In fact, he's sort of an interesting man. In fact, I've got to tell you, sort of the first time I really spent any time with him. I'd known him and met him a number of times, but just passing, just saying hi and that. And he asked me to come up and have lunch with him just before he was elected governor. And I knew he had this really sharp wit and just insight, and he was very aggressive in conversation. So I tried to figure out my best defense, and I decided my best defense was a very aggressive offense. So we sat out in his back patio having breakfast together, and I said, Arnold, I was just so delighted when I found out you had as advisors Wilson and Buffett. I mean, I was just over the moon with delight. You had Wilson and Buffett as your advisors. I was so excited until I found out it wasn't Owen and Jimmy. When I found out it was Pete and Warren, I figured I'd started off the breakfast correctly. A few minutes later, he looks at me and he says, Asa, why is you clear-thinking economists are so short? I mean, where does that come from? I mean, seriously, come on. He says, no, it's true. Milton Friedman, he can't be more than 4 feet 6 inches tall, little bitty tiny man. And you, Asa, you remind me of Danny DeVito. I starred with him in Twins. So that's my, I said goodbye to California. I moved to Nashville. Now, I do want to talk. This last year, I've published 2 books that are fun on taxes. One I did that I copied a very famous book you all will know. My book was entitled An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States. A little bit of plagiarism except for the last word. I didn't plagiarize that. I did that one, and I'm going to talk about it for a minute. I also did one that's really fun. It's a handbook on tobacco taxation, theory and practice. There's no product on earth that is more susceptible to taxes over the years. And if you really want a rich repository of information, I mean, how different countries have taxed tobacco over the years, it's just fascinating topic. But I want to stick with the states one. Let me just start off, just for fun with you. And as you know, we have 50 states in the United States. By our Constitution, you cannot have any barriers whatsoever across the states. People can move anywhere at any time and be treated normally like everyone else. So there are no costs, at least political costs, of moving across borders. Now this book, what we have is a repository of data, a cauldron of competition. All of these 50 states for years and years and years have the right of their own fiscal policy, their own regulatory policies. All of those policies they can really regulate and do themselves. And so when you look at these states, if something could be done, I'll tell you a state has done it. I mean, maybe it was Idaho in 1973, maybe it was Vermont in 1989, but there's this massive repository of data, and I'm really serious here with you. And so what I did was I went through the whole repository of data for the last 70 years for all 50 states and tried to cull sort of the patterns together. And I want to go through one of the chapters with you. One chapter, I compare the 9 states with no income tax and the 9 highest income tax states and how the performance has been over the last 50 years. And then one chapter, I have a very detailed comparison of California and Texas, which is really enlightening. Then I have all the IRS data of how people move, where they move from, and what the incomes are those people. And it's, again, fascinating stuff. I have a little last one, which I get all my opponents and all my critics. It's called Au contraire, mon frère. Do I get them? But the first chapter, and I just want to get you the first chapter, I call it The Fall from Grace. In the last 70 years in the United States, 11 states have introduced an income tax. Now, these are normal states. I mean, the first one that did it was West Virginia in 1961. The last one that did it was Connecticut in 1991. I mean, there are all 9 states in between that, like Rhode Island, Maine, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska. I mean, just normal, Indiana, I said, just normal states. 11 of those states have introduced the income tax. So what I did wasn't just go back. I took each of those states and I looked at their economic metrics in the 3 years prior to them introducing the income tax relative to the rest of the nation. So what I looked is their population relative to the rest of the nation. I looked at their employment. I looked at their labor force. I looked at their gross state product. I looked at their state and local tax revenues relative to all of them. I just did a comparison of the metrics of all these 11 states in the 3 years prior to them introducing the income tax. And then I went to the latest 2 years and looked at their metrics right now and sort of looked at what has happened to these 11 states. Let me just say this. Each and every one of those states, not one exception, each and every one of those states has declined as a share of the overall U.S. economy, bar none, in every single economic metric. Every single one. I mean, some of these states have fallen by a lot. I mean, if you look at Michigan, you know who the governor was who put in the income tax in Michigan, of course, don't you? Mitt Romney's dad. There you go. You wonder why we lost in 2012? Sorry. Michigan put in the income tax. At that time, they were 5.2% of the U.S. economy. Today, Michigan is 2.7% of the U.S. economy. That is a collapse. Detroit in 1950 had a population of 1.85 million people. Today, Detroit has a population of 675,000 people. I mean, when I was a kid, we used to vacation in Detroit. I mean, it's hard to imagine that as being possible. But it was called the Paris of North America. I mean, it's really amazing, just the collapse. My home state, Ohio. Ohio today has 1,400 separate income taxes. I mean, it's just amazing. Ohio was the citadel. We have more Fortune 500 companies there. I mean, I was born in Youngstown, raised in Cleveland. My mom and dad were both born and raised in Cleveland. All 4 of my grandparents were. 7 out of 8 of my great-grandparents were. I go back to visit my family up in Lakeview Cemetery and go around. And then I go wander through the streets of Cleveland just to see the old hometown. The buildings are all boarded up, guys walking around with brown paper bags and all that. I mean, it's just a catastrophe. It looks like a bomb shelter. And then you see this beautiful building there. I mean, just gorgeous. It's called Cleveland State University. I mean, it's brand new, perfect, beautiful. I always put a little parentheses on it, sick, for an error. There is no education, by the way, in Ohio. But And then you go a little further along, there's something called the Cleveland Clinic. Fantastic medical facility in Cleveland. Just this contrast is amazing with these wonderful facilities right in the middle of this bombed out area of the world. And you ask yourself, how could that happen? They're all 501c3s. They're tax-exempt organizations. High tax environments, tax-exempt organizations flourish in high tax environments. It's not just that. You look at some of these other states. If you look at New Jersey, one of my favorite examples. All of you know New Jersey? In 1965, now that wasn't that long ago, that was 50 years ago. In 1965, New Jersey had neither an income tax nor a sales tax, neither one. It was one of the fastest growing states in the nation. People from everywhere were moving into New Jersey, the highest in-migration state, and they had a balanced budget. 6 years ago, when my student was governor of New Jersey, a guy named John Corzine, he was my student at the University of Chicago, and just in full disclosure, a C student. And to even do additional full disclosure, after all the revelations of MF Global, I'm not even sure you're in the C, but they had the highest property taxes, highest sales taxes, highest income taxes, slowest growing state in the nation. People were leaving like rats off a sinking ship, and they had a huge budget deficit. How did they do that? West Virginia, you can't get poorer than West Virginia. You guys know West Virginia. You can't get poorer than West Virginia. Oh, yes, you can. Put in an income tax and 4 more teeth fall out. Do not repeat that when you get back to the U.S. I didn't say it. It's just amazing. Now, you go back and you ask yourself, why would these people do this? Why would they put in? Pretend we go back to the state capitals at the time of the income tax being. What would the arguments be, pro and con? Well, the people who are against putting in the income tax, they would give arguments sort of the way I do. It'll hurt your growth and output, employment, profits, and all that stuff. But the people who wanted the income tax, what would they argue? They had a very straightforward argument. We need the money. We need better schools. We need better highways. We need better prison systems. We need more police. We need better libraries. We need better nurses for the facility. That's what they argued. And it's a reasonable argument. It's one that really should objectively be looked at. You can't be at zero taxes, obviously, to have this. So what I did was I went and looked at each of these states, again, before they put in the income tax. And we have incredibly good detailed data on the number of full-time equivalent employees per 10,000 of population in all of these state and local public services. 50 to 55% of the public services in state and local governments is in education. We have it for police, we have prison guards, all those data there. So I looked at all of these 11 states, and then I looked at their provision of public services today, all relative to the rest of the nation. And if you look at the provision of public services, it's shocking. Of the 11 states, 8 states of those 11 declined in their provision of public services. 3 states improved, but they improved by just a little bitty bit. And 5 of the 8 states actually declined dramatically. We have evidence on not only inputs, but we have evidence on results. We have the Department of Education scores on NAEP scores on 4th grade, 8th grade English and math. If you look at highway systems, it's the same thing. It's just, when you look at these data, you find that there's a huge competition going on in the U.S. and the states. And when you look at politics, and I hope you don't mind me doing a little politics with you. James, is that all right? Am I allowed to? But if you look at politics, doesn't flow down from the federal government to the states. It goes up from states to the federal government. Let me take you through the 2014 election. You all know what happened in the U.S. Senate. When we came into that election, it was 45-53 with 2 independents who caucused with the Democrats, so it was 45-55. The Republicans picked up 9 Senate seats. So now it's 54-46 if you count the 2 independents there. But that won't be the end of this story. In my view, I think 2 of those who now caucus with the Democrats are going to switch allegiance and will shift in the next year to Republicans. Joe Manchin, I think, of West Virginia is going to do that. There'll never be a Democrat again in West Virginia. I think Angus King in Maine is going to switch again. He was elected a Republican. He didn't like the Republican social policies, so he switched and became an independent and caucused with the Democrats. But LePage, who is governor of Maine, was reelected. Collins was reelected, both Republicans. I think there's a good chance he will switch over and caucus now with the Republicans. It's all a matter of what you get for what you do for switching. But if you look at the House today, the U.S. House, the Republicans have more seats in the House than they've had at any time since 1932. I mean, there is no chance of the House changing for at least the next 20 years. I mean, it's solidly a Republican institution today. My guess is that after the 2016 race, the Senate will be. But the real results that occurred is where I went to the 11 states. It's all at the state and local level. The Republicans today have 31 governorships out of 50 states in the U.S. They picked up 3 governors net. They picked up, I mean, think of this. They picked up Massachusetts. Come on. We picked up Massachusetts. We picked up Maryland. We picked up Illinois. We picked up Arkansas. And now we did lose Pennsylvania. Corbett lost there, but it was a net pickup of 3. So the Republicans have 31. State legislatures. The Republicans have 30 state legislatures. The Democrats have 8. There are 12 that are split in there. If you go through all of these, there's a huge sea change in politics taking place in the United States. In my view, it's coming from the bottom up, not from the top down. It reminds me so much of the revolution that went on in the late 1970s with Proposition 13. If any of you remember the whole thing in California, I was quite involved with that. You mentioned that, thank you. But with Howard Jarvis and Paul Gann, and then there's Prop 2.5. There was Puerto Rico, the tax reforms there. There were in Guam and the Northern Marianas. It was in all over. Pete DuPont cut the highest marginal income tax rate in Delaware from 19.8%. I mean, can you imagine a state income tax of 19.8%? They cut it down to 5.5%. I mean, it's an incredible prospect. I've been to this barbecue before. And I'm going to tell you, the first time I didn't know what it was, but it smelled awful good to me. But I'd never had a meat and 3 before. But now I have. And it is just amazing the parallels that are taking place. You know, when you look at the battlegrounds today, and I'm going to take you through 2 battlegrounds and then I'll stop. And I mean, one is this tax the rich stuff. You know the one, and I'm going to take you through it a little bit because it's a fascinating topic. And it's not only a fascinating topic, we have really, really solid, detailed data on tax revenues, tax receipts, by income, by tax return. You know, there's nothing the government likes more than to knowing where the taxpayers are, who they are, and how they can find them and go after them. I mean, we have really great data. Now, just for a little bit of fun, we put in a progressive income tax in the United States for the first time in 1913. It was Woodrow Wilson. And at that time, when we put it in, the highest tax rate in the U.S. was 7%. Okay? That was 1913. Okay? Now, I want to stipulate something here. In 1912, the highest tax rate on the rich was 0%. In 1913, the highest tax rate on the rich was 7%. I will stipulate to all of you today that tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners went up. Don't be too serious with me yet. I mean, but never again. By 1919, they'd raised the highest tax rate in the U.S. from 7% to 77%. Is that a good enough increase for you? Oh, you didn't know that, did you? That was Woodrow Wilson. The war finished, and the race of 1920 was exactly on tax rates. It was all that. Woodrow Wilson's handpicked candidate was Governor Cox of Ohio, and his running mate on the Democratic ticket was a guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was Cox's best friend. And they ran on a slogan, or ran on a policy of keeping tax rates high to pay off the wartime debt. Okay, they wanted to keep the tax rates high to pay off the wartime debt. By the way, it happened in Britain too, it happened in Germany, it happened in France as well. You guys never had the tax cuts. Those two were faced by Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, Republicans. Their slogan was a return to normalcy. They wanted to cut tax rates back to their pre-World War I levels. Harding and Coolidge won the election by the largest percentage ever in U.S. history. They just trounced them. Now let me tell you what they did. They cut the highest tax rate from 77% in 1919 to 25%. Okay? So they cut the tax rate on the rich to less than a third of what it had been before. You all follow me? Now, the period that followed was something called the Roaring Twenties. We had one of the biggest booms in U.S. history. If you look at tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners, in spite of the fact that the rate went down to less than a third of what it had been before in the highest bracket, tax revenues as a share of GDP went through the ceiling during the Roaring Twenties. Then we had the 1930s. In June of 1930, Herbert Hoover signed into law the biggest tax increase on traded products in U.S. history. It was called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff. With that huge tax increase, the economy was spiraling down. This rocket surgeon was having a little bit of a problem with his budget. So in 1931, just to make things right and bring them back to normal, he passed a tax bill. And on January 1st, 1932, the highest marginal income tax rate in the United States went from 25% to 63%. You can't make this stuff up, people. You can't. The lowest bracket before he did that tax was a 2% tax on all incomes over $20,000. After his tax bill, it was 6% on all incomes over $4,000. He put in the estate tax for the first time in U.S. history. He increased all these excise taxes. State and local government put in a lot of taxes. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. This economy went right down. Bang, it hit trough at the end of 1932. Roosevelt was elected at the end of 1932, took office in 1933. The first thing he did in March, and I won't go through this with you, is called the Bank Holiday Act, where we went and disallowed specie to be held by private citizens, criminal offense. But I won't go through all that with you. Did that in 1933, and then the economy still performed very badly. So in 1935, Roosevelt had his own budget bill passed. He was having a tough time with the budget and the spending and all that. And so they raised the highest marginal tax rate on January 1st, 1936. All right, from 63% to 79%, and wandering it on up to 83%. They not only did that, that was just fun. I mean, nice stuff. They pushed the inheritance tax up to 90%. For any of you in business, they had a 25% per annum retained earnings tax. That'll make your company really prosper. There you go. I mean, is it any wonder it was the longest, deepest depression in U.S. history? But now let's take a look at the rich. They raised the tax rate on the rich from 25 to 83%. We have the numbers. What happened to tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners? They went down as a share of GDP. I mean, they went down. It's just amazing. After World War II, John F. Kennedy cut the highest marginal income tax rate from 91% to 70%, put in the investment tax credit for the first time in U.S. history, shortened depreciable lives to increase the incentives to save, invest, increase productivity, cut taxes on traded products. It was called the Kennedy Round Tariff Negotiation. All right, he cut the corporate tax rate from 52 to 48%. He tried to cut it to 46%, but thank God for Barry Goldwater and the Republicans, because they were able to block him from doing this irresponsible move. I mean, the Republicans were the worst. Bob Dole, you all know who Bob Dole is. He voted against cutting the highest tax rate from 91% to 70%. And his logic was, we can't afford the revenue losses. I mean, he's never seen a tax increase he didn't like. I mean, after Kennedy, the period was called the Go-Go 60s. Guess what happened to tax revenues in the top 1% of income earners? They went way, way up. Then we had, as a share of GDP again, then we had the period which I like to refer to as the Four Stooges. The Four Stooges, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. You just saw a little bit of Ford. Again, you can't make this stuff up. Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. That was the largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance probably ever put on planet Earth. I mean, tax revenues as a share of GDP went from the top 1% of income earners went down during that period. I mean, you know, it did. And then, excuse me, I'm a little out of it. Does anyone have any water by any? Just joking. Just joking. The skies opened. The clouds cleared. The sun shone forth on America. The fields turned green. The animals, they multiplied. The trees blossomed and bore fruit. The children danced in the streets, and Ronald Reagan was nominated and elected. We cut the highest marginal income tax rate in the U.S. Now, Try me on this. From 70% down to 28%, that a good enough cut for you? We cut the corporate rate from 46 to 34. I could go on. If you swam, we cut your taxes. If you flew, we cut your taxes. You dig holes, we cut your we just throughout the whole period, and it kept going. It wasn't just Reagan, it was Clinton. I mean, Clinton was a phenomenal tax cutter, just so you know. He did raise the personal income tax rate. That's true. But he pushed NAFTA through Congress against his own party, against the labor unions. I mean, that's a huge cut in tax traded products, and we got to tip your hat to him there. We had the biggest capital gains tax cut in our nation's history with Clinton. Exempted owner-occupied homes from all capital gains taxation. Clinton cut government spending as a share of GDP by 3.5 percentage points, more than the next four peacetime presidents combined. I mean, it was just incredible. Welfare reform, Clinton. I mean, the idea that you actually have to look for a job before you can get welfare. I mean, how unfair is that? That. If you look at it, 1980, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners as a share of GDP was 1.5%. 2006, it was 3.2%. You know, when you look at these data, you get just the opposite results from what all the politicians will tell you on the rich. Every other category, you get the exact results you'd expect. When you raise taxes on the bottom 95%, revenues go up. When you lower tax rates on the bottom 95%, you lose revenues. And why is that true? And the answer is really simply, rich people are different than most other people. They're rich. They can hire lawyers, accountants, deferred income specialists, congressmen, senators. When you see a group of people hanging with Obama, don't think for a moment it's a group of street people trying to explain to them what it's like being poor. No, these are people who want favors. I mean, and rich people have not only the means to do things, they have the ways of doing them as well. Rich people can change the location of their income. I moved from California to Tennessee purely and simply for taxes. I bought my house in Belmead with my first year's tax savings. I mean, offshore funds. Rich people can change their location of their income. They can change the timing of their income. IRAs, KIOs, 401ks, they can do all the deferred stuff. Rich people can also change the composition of their income. Rich people can also change the volume of their income. They can take a year off and go sailing around the world, whatever. You know, I'm going to tell you a story. Rich people have all sorts of options that are not open to other people. And they don't like paying taxes they don't think are fair. And they really adjust their behavior. Now, I'm going to take you through one guy. You probably know him. He's a French guy from Nebraska, Omaha. You probably heard of him, Warren Buffett. Have you heard of Warren Buffett? I'm going to take you on an example of Warren Buffett, what he does. Now, Warren Buffett says, me and my friends, we don't pay enough taxes. Now, we're going to invest anyway. I mean, we're shucks. We're going to invest, but we don't pay enough tax. We'd want you, Mr. Obama, to raise taxes, please, for all of us, just so we can get along with you. You remember this, stories of him. I mean, for doing that, Obama was so grateful. He gave him a Congressional Medal of Honor. I mean, you know. I'm going to take you through the story of Warren Buffett, all right? He wrote a letter to the New York Times in 2010. In that letter, he said that he pays less in taxes as a share of his income than anyone in his office. I think there were 20 people in his office. And in fact, he said, not only do I pay less than anyone in my office, I pay half as much as my secretary does. He wrote that in his letter. That's what he said there. He said, now you may think the amount of taxes I pay is a lot. I pay $7 million in taxes, a little bit less than $7 million, $6,980,000. You can get the letter. We have the exact amount. He said, you may think I pay a lot in taxes, but as a share of my income now, that's not very much. That is only 17.4% of my income. Now, are you all holding on to your seats for a second? Because I'm going to do a real math trick for you. You ready? Holding on? I took the 17.4% that he said was his tax percentage as a share of his income. And he said his taxes were $7 million. I divided $7 million by 0.174. Voila! I have his adjusted gross income of about $40 million. Now that's a lot of income, by the way. $40 million is no slouch for income. But then I sat back and tried to think of what is income? And being a University of Chicago guy, we have a Henry Simon's definition of income is the one I like most of all. Your income in any one period of time is what you spend, what you give away, and the increase in your wealth. That's your income. Now think about it for a second. How much you spend, how much you give away, and the increase in your wealth, that's your income. Now, I don't have any clue as to what Warren Buffett spent, but I did go to Forbes 500. We know he owns a few shares in Berkshire Hathaway. So I looked at the Berkshire Hathaway stock and his share of it by Forbes. I use Forbes as my expert on this. And at the beginning of 2010, his wealth was listed as $40 billion. At the end of 2010, his wealth was up to $50 billion. He had an increase in wealth of $10 billion. I then went to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation website, and there you have Warren Buffett's gift. It's all, by the way, you'd find it for all the conditions he put on that gift. If it ever becomes taxable, you got to give it back to me. I mean, but it's all for altruistic reasons. I love it. Hypocrisy knows no bounds. In that year, he gave Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation $1.75 billion in that year. I didn't go to his son's websites. He has two sons, have foundations. He gives a lot to them and his daughter as well. But if you look at Warren Buffett's income in real terms, in 2010, he made well over $12 billion. And his tax payment was $7 million. His tax percentage wasn't 17.4%. He paid 0.06% of his income in taxes. Now, I didn't touch on that Berkshire Hathaway is an insurance company, so therefore they can earn income with the deferred taxes on the future payouts. I didn't mention that. I also didn't mention that because he owns Berkshire Hathaway, he doesn't have to pay capital gains when he buys and sells companies because they're below the Berkshire Hathaway corporate structure. So he only has to pay when Berkshire Hathaway gets bought or sold, not when the companies they own do. I mean, if you look at this, the rich can really get around taxes legally. You look at the top 500. This is the battleground. It's going to be there in the election. My view is the taxes on the rich and how you do it, that will be one of the battlegrounds. The next one I want to touch on with you, and it's the last one I'll touch with you, and then I want to go to sort of what the economic plan should be. The next one is the stimulus spending. Now, let me just, I'm an economist, just a boring old economist. I believe incentives really matter. But let me just try on a couple of these. I mean, if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, do I need to say the next sentence to you? I mean, come on. You're going to get a lot of people not working. If you tax rich people and give the money to poor people, you're going to get lots and lots of poor people and no rich people. I mean, who ever heard of a poor person spending himself into wealth? Does that make sense to you? I mean, that's what but that's what all the guys did with both Bush and Obama. It was not just Obama. Believe me, it was Paulson. Do any of you remember Paulson doing that one? And I mean, just the image still gets me. There he was squealing like a 5-year-old in a scary movie. He had a bill, 4-page bill, and a congressional bill has only 100 words per page. So it was just 400 words that granted to him all authority over $700 billion to stimulate the economy. He said, it's so terrible. You can't wait. You can't have any debates. There's no expert witness. There's no testifying. You got to pass it today. Otherwise, the world goes into. Do any of you remember that? You know, I've been in the White House and in government a long time. And my motto about politicians is, whenever politicians make decisions, when they are either panicked or drunk, the consequences are rarely attractive. We had this stimulus package, including Bush and Obama. If you look at the $700 billion, it started off in 2007 with the housing bill with an extra stimulus in there, and then we had the agricultural bill with a little stimulus in there. Okay, we did that. Then, of course, we had AIG, we had Bear Stearns, we had Lehman Brothers, all of that stuff, and then we had the $700 billion one, Paulson. And then when Obama came in, we had $864 billion Obama stimulus. We had cash for clunkers. You know, you can't imagine them. If you take all the stimulus spending together, now that's not all spending. This is all stimulus spending above and beyond the normal runnings of business, of government, all right? This was an additional amount put in explicitly to stimulate the economy. And it was about $3.75 trillion. Now, to put that into context, just sort of you can see it in its perspective, that's on a GDP of a little less than 15 trillion. That's on tax revenues per annum of a little less than 2.5 trillion. All right? So you got sort of, I mean, we did stimulus spending about 1.75 years worth of tax revenues. Total government spending as a share of GDP went from about 30% to 39% of GDP in that period. The logic, and I'll give you how Larry Summers describes the logic. And you'll all recognize, all of you have had macroeconomics, haven't you? You know your Keynesian multiplier and Keynesian stimulus spending, and I'll just take you through it quickly. Larry Summers, the first one was the $600 per capita, which was called a tax rebate, which you got except if you paid taxes. But they called it a tax rebate. They did. And they called it a tax rebate, but anyone who paid taxes didn't get it. All right. And the way Larry Summers described the $600 one is this way. If you give a guy $600 that he otherwise would not have had, that guy having more than he otherwise would have had will spend more than he otherwise would have spent had he not had the $600. You with me? He'll buy goods and services that he otherwise wouldn't have bought had he not had the $600. All right? That in turn will create jobs, output, production, income for those people. Those people will have higher incomes than they otherwise would have had he not spent some of the money on them. And they now will spend more, and there'll be this cascading effect. All of you follow me in this? Cascading effect through the economy. It'll sort of lift itself up by the bootstraps. If you look at the total amount they spent, that's the stimulus spending. If you look at the increase, that's the multiplier, the increase divided by the initial stimulus. To be a little wonky with you, it's the multiplier is 1/1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. You all follow me in this? So what Larry Summers said, you know, if you spend the $600, that'll stimulate the economy. And with that, he finished that and he sat down. Now, let me tell you, as far as Larry went, he's right. If you give a person $600 that that person otherwise would not have had, that person will spend more than he would have otherwise spent, she others spent. That will in turn create jobs, output, employment, higher incomes for those people. They'll in turn spend more. And there will be a cascading effect that the spending recipient, the transfer recipient, will be stimulated, and that will lead to a cascading effect of increased income. But that's only the first chapter of a 3-chapter book. Let me, if I can, do the second chapter. The second chapter starts off with a line, "The tooth fairy no longer works at the U.S. Treasury." You know, the Treasury doesn't create resources. The Treasury redistributes resources. Government redistributes. For every transfer recipient, there's a transfer payer. It's a double entry accounting system. I'm sorry to tell you about that. But it is. I mean, you know, if you look at it in terms of the, and again, being a little nerdy with you, but the Slutsky equation. If you take an economy and you aggregate all the Slutsky equations, the income effects always offset each other. They sum to zero. This came about by an economist called Leon Walras. Any of you remember that? Leon Walras was then translated into English and Lord Hicks by Lord John Hicks into English, and it's the first 110 pages of Value and Capital, which is sort of cool stuff there. I'll give you the example I like for Walras, and let me just show. If the price of apples rises, it is very, very true that apple growers will be wealthier, they'll have higher incomes, and they'll spend more money. That's true. But it's equally as true if the price of apples rises, apple consumers will be poorer, they'll have lower income, and they will spend less. The income effects offset each other by the hour, by the day, by the week, by the month, by the year, to the 9,335th decimal place. You know, if you have 100 apples in an economy, and you take 10 of those apples and give them to people based upon some characteristic other than work effort, those people will be stimulated, but the people who had the 100 apples now only have 90 apples, and they will be destimulated. While the transfer recipients are stimulated, the transfer payers are destimulated, and those two effects offset each other completely. Do you follow me? I mean, you can see it this way. It's hard to see some of this stuff in the economy that we have with 335 million people and all these things, Chinese default credits and multipliers and velocity and all this stuff going on. It's just, you can't keep track of your accounting systems. You can't. You got these partial derivatives that you're trying to add up all over the place, and it gets really way too confusing. But if it's good economics, it works in an economy of 330 million, doesn't it? It works in an economy of 30 million. It works in an economy of 17 people. It should work in an economy of 2 people. The difference in a 2-person economy and a 330 million person economy is you can actually understand what's going on when it's 2 people. Imagine we have 2 farmers, Farmer A and Farmer B. Okay, that's it. You with me? Farmer A and Farmer B. Let's imagine that Farmer B gets unemployment benefits. Who do you think pays for them? Am I going way over your heads in this one? The income effects always net to 0. That's chapter 2. There is no stimulus in a stimulus package. Now, chapter 3, it gets a little ugly, so forgive me on this one. While the income effects sum to 0 in the Slutsky equation in an economy, the substitution effects don't. They aggregate. Let me take you back to the example where the price of apples rises. If the price of apples rises, you can see how the apple consumers and apple producers have offsetting income effects. But the higher price of apples does 2 things for everyone, both producers and consumers. The higher price of apples incentivizes suppliers to supply more, and it incentivizes demanders to demand less. The substitution effects work across all people in the same direction. Do you follow me on that? And the same thing is true with the substitution effects of a stimulus package. And I'll take you through that. I mean, I had the worst time in 1974. This was this tape up here with Jerry Ford. Jerry Ford had the bright idea of doing a real tax rebate back then. And I was testifying before Senator Nelson of Wisconsin. The other 3 economists testifying were Gardner Ackley, Paul McCracken, and who was it from Harvard? I'll think of it in a split second. The 3 of them were all testifying in favor of the stimulus package, saying it was really help. And I was trying to explain my position and the substitution effect. And, I got confused. I didn't have a good anecdote for it. And finally, I just got so frustrated. I said, Senator Nelson, as if these other 3 economists are correct. Gardner, and if these 3 other economists are correct, what in the hell's the matter with you? Why only do $600 per capita? Don't you love our country? I mean, why just have a little, let's get a boom. Let's do $6,000. Let's do $60,000. Let's do $600,000. Let's do $1 million. Let's do 100% of GDP. Let's do a stimulus package equal to 100% of GDP. So all those who work and produce receive nothing, and all those who don't work and don't produce receive everything. Senator, what do you honestly think would happen to GDP? And the answer would go to 0. The substitution effects of a transfer are exactly what Milton Friedman used to say. Government spending is taxation, pure and simple. And the larger your stimulus package, the larger the government spending, the larger the tax is. My view is that the Great Recession was caused by the stimulus spending. It was not in spite of the worst economy, in spite of stimulus spending. This is the political battleground that's going on in the U.S. is what are the roles of government? My view always has been primum non nocere. First of all, do no harm. If all of you around you are panicked, put your hands over your ears, shut your eyes and yell, I'm not listening until they're not panicked any longer. Get a brown paper bag and let them until they calm down a little bit. But, when you look at this, the reason I believe that we had the Great Recession was because of these plans, because of these policies. We had an equally bad offset in 2000, as you may remember the Y2K. But the government actually didn't get to do any policies back then, so it was over in about a year completely. But this is the debating ground going on. This is the debate that's going on, is the role of government in the economy. When you look at it from my perspective, the pro-growth agenda, you've got 5 things you want to do. You want a low-rate, broad-based, flat tax. So you provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. and you give them the least places to which they can escape. Warren Buffett should pay taxes. He really should. And he should pay the same percentage everyone else across the board. It should be a flat rate. He shouldn't pay less than everyone else. But a low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint. I mean, Milton's right. Government spending is taxation. Sound money. There is nothing that can bring an economy to its knees quicker than unsound money. In the 1980s, when we came in, the prime interest rate in the U.S. was 21.5%. We were in double-digit inflation. Today, we have the opposite. The Fed has done with quantitative easing, has pushed interest rates almost down to zero. You know, when you get interest rates too high, it discourages people from buying homes. When you get interest rates too low, it discourages people from lending mortgages. And in both cases, you get less homes. When you push the price below equilibrium, you always end up in the supply constraint. When you push a price above equilibrium, you always end up in the demand constraint. The right price is the equilibrium price in a free market. That's when you get the optimal amount of houses being constructed. We have the lowest new housing construction per 10,000 population. It's been way 1/3 of the average for the last 9 years. I mean, it's just incredible. Low rate, broad-based flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, free trade. I mean, there are some things we do better than foreigners, and there are some things foreigners do better than we do. I mean, and we and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products we make better than they do in exchange for those products they make better than we do. It's a win-win situation. It's called David Ricardo, the gains from trade, comparative advantage. I mean, the way I like to put it is, you know, without China, there is no Walmart. And without Walmart, there is no middle class or lower class prosperity in the U.S. Believe me when I tell you that. Free trade is essential to economic prosperity. Low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, free trade, and lastly, minimal regulations. We all know you need regulations. You can't wake up in the morning and decide which side of the street you're going to drive on today. Well, I want freedom. No, you need regulations. But what you want to make sure you don't do is go beyond the specific purpose at hand and do a whole mess of collateral damage to the overall economy. Low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, free trade, minimal regulations, then get the hell out of the way and let the market solve itself. You know, we are in the midst of a political revolution in the U.S., and I think you're going to see some very exciting things. I think in 2016 you're going to see amazing election victories by pro-growth people. I think you're going to see the 17 on period. And if I can put it in sort of terms of politics and economics, I'll just tell you that in my view, I used to tease the real president. You know who I mean, Ronnie. I used to tease the real president. I used to say, sir, you know, it's my opinion as a professor, as an academic, as an economist, that you, sir, truly are a certifiable genius. I said, but you know, sir, some of my colleagues at the university don't concur in my assessment of your intellectual acumen. In fact, some of my colleagues don't think you're very bright at all. But the one thing my colleagues and I do agree upon is that your one unique characteristic is your uncanny ability to select your 4 predecessors. Anyone following on the heels of Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter just can't look bad. You know, and I can tell you, I was with the president in '76, and I can tell you very honestly, if he had been elected in '76, he would have not been the Ronald Reagan you know and love today. In all honesty, it took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan. And in the same sense, it took Jimmy Carter to create Ronald Reagan. You cannot imagine the great president who's going to follow Barack Obama. Thank you very much.